Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ellie Beamer-Wilson, and I am the State Director for Environment Virginia. I will be moderating today's webinar, which is the first in our Reduce, Reuse, Recycle webinar series, organized in partnership with Lynnhaven River Now, Clean Virginia Waterways, and Clean Fairfax. Over the next 3 weeks, we will be looking at emerging solutions to reducing plastic pollution in our waterways, exploring false solutions and issues with plastic recycling, and lastly, how Virginia is working to eliminate harmful single-use plastics in our environment. We'll be joined throughout the series by experts in plastic-related waste management, policy, technical solutions, wildlife impacts, and industry solutions. You can register for the remaining webinars using the link that's shared in the chat. So our goal for this webinar series is to re-examine the common phrase, reduce, reuse, recycle. Oftentimes when people think about plastic pollution, they jump straight to recycling as the answer, while forgetting what actually comes first in that saying. Over the next few weeks, we're going to dig into the questions of how we can better focus on the reducing and the reusing to reduce single-use plastic pollution. Can we make the 3 R's even stronger? Is our focus on recycling doing more harm than good? How can we use the 3 R's to adopt comprehensive and cohesive policies and systems that move us to a more circular economy? To start off our webinar series and dive into these questions, today we'll be hearing from some really great speakers. First, we'll hear from Zach Huntington of Clean Virginia Waterways. He will provide a brief overview on the growing plastic pollution crisis and share results from Virginia voter public perception survey on plastic pollution. It's a statewide survey by Clean Virginia Waterways in the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program and OpinionWorks. The survey explored the perceptions and attitudes of Virginia's voters about several problems and measured voter support for policies that have been adopted in other states. Next we have Celeste Mayford-Swango from Environment Oregon. She will share how producers can play a central role in reducing plastic pollution by looking at extended producer responsibility, an old concept, but an emerging policy solution in the plastics world. She'll share what Oregon has done and give perspective on what lessons Virginia can learn from this emerging policy solution across the country. Next, we'll shift gears to talk about plastic pollution already polluting our environment. Hannah DeFrum from the International Trash Trap Network will share how Virginia could use trash trap mechanisms to clean up plastic pollution that has already entered our waterways, and how trash traps actually supply valuable data and provide beneficial education opportunities. Lastly, we will hear from Jeff Flood of Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program, who will share an overview of Virginia's Abandoned and Derelict Vessels Program, progress that's been made here, and the next steps to solve the problem of abandoned derelict vessels in Virginia. So we have a jam-packed schedule today, but we do have a bit of time at the end for questions. You can ask questions in the Q&A section here in Zoom or using the Google form that we're going to share in the chat. We'll save any questions that we don't get to and be sure to get to answers to folks after the webinar. So thank you again for joining us today, and I will pass it over to our first speaker, Zach Huntington.
Thanks, Ellie. I'm Zach Huntington. I'm the Associate Director of Clean Virginia Waterways. We were founded in 1995 at Longwood University, and we're an affiliate of the Ocean Conservancy. And our mission is to enhance the health of Virginia's water resources through pollution prevention, education, and stewardship activities involving Virginians from students, businesses, and elected officials. We specialize in utilizing data to identify the most prevalent types and sources of plastic pollution, as well as identifying nationwide best practices to develop strategies for reducing the broader plastic pollution crisis. Next slide, please. And plastics are made with fossil fuels. They harm human and environmental health for the entirety of their life cycle, from the process of extracting natural gas and oil, to transit in pipelines and on trains, to the factories where it's made into plastic bottles or other plastic products. All the way to its final resting place, whether it's in the environment, the landfill, or a recycling center. And for scope of the problem, in 1950, there were less than 2 million tons of plastic produced. By 2021, there were 456 million tons of plastic produced. And by 2050, the fossil fuel industry projects plastic production to surpass 1,100 million tons. And of all that plastic produced, 40%, over 40% is single use and used for less than 12 minutes. Next slide. All of the plastic that has ever been produced is still here. You know, whether it's sitting in a landfill or it's floating in the ocean, or if it was burned in an incinerator. And plastic has been found in the deepest ocean canyons. It's been found off the waters of Antarctica. And the actions that we take here in Virginia have a significant impact. Most of the plastic floating in the ocean begins on land. Somewhere between 60 and 80% of all ocean plastic pollution originates on land via storm drains, streams, rivers. And over 80% of that pollution is made of plastic. And the sources of plastic pollution are many. They include inadequate and underserviced dumpsters and trash cans, intentional littering, uncovered truckloads, but it can also come in the form of large items like abandoned derelict vessels that we'll hear more about later today. The picture at the top of this slide is a Virginia creek less than a mile from the Potomac River. All of the ocean is connected. The actions we take here in Virginia have a global impact. Next slide, please. And the problem of plastic pollution is significant, and Virginia does have a plan. So in partnership with the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program, we authored the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan, which was first published in 2014 and updated in 2021. Virginia was the first East Coast state with a marine debris reduction plan. And this plan has over 70 partners, including representatives from state and local governments, nonprofits, academia, industry and private business partners, regional bodies, natural resource managers, indigenous groups, and many others. The 2021 plan was updated in alignment with NOAA's Mid-Atlantic Plan. And both of these plans emphasize the four main sources of marine debris, and they both emphasize the use of social marketing approach to change human behaviors. The Coastal Zone Management's marine debris strategy funds are granted to us at Clean Virginia Waterways, and we work in close collaboration with the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. The four goals of the plan are consumer debris, which includes things like single-use plastics, derelict fishing gear, microplastics and microfibers, which are the small bits of plastic breaking off from larger pieces, as well as the plastic fibers that slough off our synthetic clothing when we wash and dry them, and then abandoned and derelict vessels. Next slide. So one of the near-term goals of the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan was to measure public support for new laws and policies that will reduce the sources of marine debris. And I'm really excited to share with you the results of this statewide survey. You can find a one-page overview, an 8-page summary, and the full 285-page report on our website. So the survey was completed in the spring of 2022 and was funded by a grant from the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program to Clean Virginia Waterways. And then we worked closely as partners with OpinionWorks. OpinionWorks is an independent research firm based in Maryland, and they apply science-based research practices with the goal of fostering behavior change and engagement in environmental stewardship. Next page. So this survey is a representative sample of Virginia voters. There were 901 surveys in the data set, which gives us a good solid sample size and produces a margin of error plus or minus 3.3. And it's mixed mode sampling, which means there was a variety of ways folks were contacted. It was a combination of online and telephone, both landline and cell phone. And OpinionWorks put together a blended populations sample, which does a really good job of finding people and being representative within all corners of the electorate. And additionally, there were 10 in-depth interviews conducted in May of 2022 that provided some great insight. Next slide. And this is what the results of mixed mode sampling for the survey look like. It's an accurate cross-section of Virginia's population and an even representation of political affiliation. Next slide. So we wanted to understand how people are thinking about plastic pollution and how it compares to other issues expressed by Virginia voters. So the first thing OpinionWorks did was ask people to rate a whole series of problems, including non-environmental issues. And they asked them to rate these problems on a scale of very serious, somewhat serious, not much of a problem, or not a problem at all. And the survey was completed in the spring of 2022, and not surprisingly, inflation was the #1 concern. But just beneath that is plastic floating in the ocean and plastic and toxins contaminating human food. 87% of Virginians said plastic floating in the ocean was a very serious or a somewhat serious concern to them. And you can see just how it compares to the other list of concerns. Only 73% of Virginians consider climate change to be a problem. There's broad recognition that plastic pollution is a problem with bipartisan support. The task is implementing policies that will stop the overwhelming flow of plastics into our communities and waterways. And it's also important to mention here that the climate crisis and the plastic pollution crisis are inextricably linked, from the folks suffering the most serious impacts to the companies responsible for the pollution. And an interesting takeaway from this rating is that all the way down here at the bottom, you can see trash and litter in your community is only 61%. And I think that goes to show that there needs to be better communication about the sources of plastic pollution, because we know that 60 to 80% of all ocean plastic pollution is generated by land-based sources. Next slide. One more, thanks. So the first policy we'll look at today is the one we actually have here in Virginia. And only 48% of Virginians support a 5-cent fee on single-use plastic bags. And the breakdown on bag fees is pretty partisan, with Democrats being the most likely to support the policy. However, only 16% of people strongly oppose the bag fee option. Next slide. Staying on the theme of single-use plastic bags, a ban on single-use plastic bags is a policy that Virginia has had the opportunity to enact. And this policy has significantly higher support than for the fee. You can see that it's 77% of Democrats, 49% of Republicans, and 59% of independents. And there was actually a bag ban bill introduced in the 2023 General Assembly, but it did not pass. Another important takeaway is that only 9% of people strongly oppose a ban on single-use plastic bags. Next slide. So a topic that's been a hot button issue in Virginia for several years is expanded polystyrene food and beverage containers. And Virginians support policies to eliminate the products. In 2021, the General Assembly passed HB 1902, which set a phase-out date for EPS food and beverage containers of 2023 for restaurants with more than 20 locations and 2025 for smaller restaurants. However, at the 2022 General Assembly, a budget amendment delayed implementation until 2028. Now, an interesting note from the in-depth interviews, the participants were shocked to find out the ban had been delayed. My favorite quote from the interviews is, "They should have been banned in 1992, not 2022. So we've got a 63% support in Virginia for a ban, and only 6% of people strongly oppose this policy option. Next slide, please. Bottle deposit programs or bottle bills, bottle deposit schemes, beverage container deposits, sometimes called recycling refunds, are strongly supported by Virginia voters. 65% of people would support a bottle bill in Virginia. More people support this policy after you explain that you get your deposit back. We'll go Next slide. So as localities in Virginia continue to struggle to maintain recycling services, with some even ending curbside pickup altogether, extra investment and support from a policy that would require manufacturers to pay for recycling could really help out struggling Virginia localities right now. And this policy has even more support in Virginia than a bottle deposit program, with 84% of Democrats, 58% of Republicans, 74% of independents. And again, only 6% of people strongly oppose a policy that would require manufacturers to pay for recycling. Next slide. So the last policy we'll look at today is requiring less plastic in packaging. And this policy has the most support of any of the policies included in the survey. 76% of registered Virginia voters support requiring less plastic in packaging, with 82% of Democrats and 69% of Republicans, 78% of independents, and only 4% of people strongly oppose this policy. Next slide, please. So there's broad bipartisan support for proven policies that reduce plastic pollution. People of all political, ethnic, socioeconomic, and racial backgrounds want to see action and legitimate policy reform to end the plastic pollution crisis. And the survey provides valuable insight on how we can communicate the message of plastic pollution, evidence that these policies are supported by a broad cross-section of Virginians, and leave us with the question of what is stopping these proven policies from being implemented in the Commonwealth. The answer to that question are many, and the most effective thing we can do is continue to speak about the valuable solutions using the most effective messaging possible. Next slide. And our publication page is a great resource for plastic pollution information. We have the full 285 report of the Public Perception Survey. We have reports on bottle bills, the Virginia Litter Control and Recycling Fund, the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan, and many others. And next slide. And thank you so much for joining us and giving me the time to speak about our survey. And thank you to our partners who made it possible to produce this report.
Thank you so much, Zach. Now we will hear from Celeste.
Hi, everyone. I'm really honored to be here today. Thank you so much, Ellie, for inviting me to speak. My name is Celeste Mayfern-Swango. I'm the State Director with Environment Oregon, based here in Portland, and the Zero Waste Program Director with Environment America, of which Environment Virginia is part. We're a national network of 29 state environmental groups that tackle the most profound problem of our time, which is a way of living that is destroying the natural world. So I'm here to talk about producer responsibility as a means to reduce plastic pollution. It sounds like lots of you are familiar with this problem and are actively working on solutions. So thank you for all of that work. But I did want to take just a quick minute to outline the basic problems we're trying to solve first, and then I'll get into the meat on producer responsibility. So next slide. So our country and world's addiction to plastic, as we just heard from Zach, is a growing problem, responsible for country-sized swirling gyres of plastic waste in our oceans and growing landfills in our country's interior. In the United States, we generate enough plastic waste to fill Cowboy Stadium, the largest professional football stadium in the country, every 16 hours. And plastic as a material is just a huge challenge because it doesn't break down easily, if at all, persisting for hundreds of years or more, wreaking havoc on ecosystems and endangering public health and the overall health of our planet. So when thinking about how we wanted to solve the issue of plastic pollution, we realized there's two basic problems that we need to solve. The first is that our society and our culture are becoming more and more of a disposable, throwaway culture. So more and more of the products that we use are intended to be used just one time and thrown away. And our economy encourages us to make, use, and toss at the greatest possible speed. So often we don't think twice about getting our coffee to go in a plastic cup with a plastic straw, or our food, as you can see in this photo, in a plastic container. And then when we're done with these single-use plastics, usually after just a few minutes of use, we throw them away. Only there is no away. Next slide. So only a very small percentage of plastics get turned into another consumer product, just about 9%. Some get incinerated, which is bad for public health and our climate. And the rest, about 79%, either end up in landfills or in our natural environment. And this is causing huge problems for our natural world, our public health, and our climate. And unfortunately, plastic production is on the rise. So the second problem is that right now, the system is set up so that the companies that are actually producing all of this plastic waste can really put whatever they want on the market, regardless of where it ends up after the consumer uses it. So they're completely absolved of all responsibility, which leaves you and me with limited choices when we're buying consumer goods. And then we actually foot the bill to manage the waste. So if we're going to solve this massive problem, we have to shift away from our single-use disposable culture and put more responsibility on the producers to actually create products that use less or no plastics and create products that are easily recycled, repaired, or reused. And that's why, in addition to passing bans on wasteful single-use products, several states are turning to producer responsibility programs for packaging as a way to address the proliferation of wasteful plastics. So next slide. All right, so big picture, we want to be moving away from the linear consumption and throwaway system, which contributes, again, to a lot of the world's environmental problems, not just plastics, including climate, air, water, and ocean pollution. It contributes to the loss of natural areas and habitats, and it depletes our natural resources. And we want to move towards a circular economy in which consumer products and the materials that make up our world are built to last and easy to repair. And then once they fulfill their original purpose, they're repurposed through reuse, recycling, or composting in a sustainable loop. And effective producer responsibility programs can play an important role in moving the United States from a linear economy to a more circular economy. Next slide, please. So one of the most wasteful products that we deal with every day as consumers is packaging and foodware. And so many states are considering producer responsibility bills for packaging and other single-use products, since that's just it's a growing part of our waste stream. And producer responsibility laws can help modernize recycling systems while also putting in place incentives for producers to use less wasteful packaging and single-use products. And in adopting those programs, we want to ensure that they're integrated into an overall approach to waste reduction that first and foremost prioritizes reducing the amount of waste that's generated, that encourages the reuse, repair, and refurbishment of products wherever possible, and then recycling and composting all remaining materials, which means that we're landfilling and incinerating as little material as possible. And the way to do that is by requiring producers to bear all of the end-of-life costs of their products, which includes waste collection, transportation and management, and litter cleanup costs. And so producers pay for these costs by paying a fee for the products that they're selling into the state. And then the fees are adjusted to incentivize producers to use materials that are easier to recycle or reuse, to use recycled content in their products, and to design products that last and are easy and economical to repair, recycle, or compost. And so this fee structure is called eco-modulation, which is a wonky term I don't really like using, but that's the basic concept, is that the better the environmental outcomes at the end of life for the product, the smaller the fee. And then in addition, another kind of key component of a producer responsibility law is that there should just be really high standards for oversight and transparency at every stage in the process to ensure that the producers are actually complying with the requirements. But if you can set up the program right, producer responsibility is a proven approach to reducing waste and improving recycling. Because if you just think about it big picture, as long as individuals, governments, our environment, and future generations, and not producers, are bearing the cost of the waste, then the producers who actually design and make the products that we buy have no incentive to change. And so producer responsibility kind of flips that and ensures that producers have a stake in the system as well. Next slide. Okay, so I cheated. This photo is not from the bill that I'm about to talk about, but the bill I'm about to talk about was passed during the pandemic, so we didn't get a cute bill signing photo. This is from when we passed the single-use plastic bag ban. But in 2021, the Oregon legislature passed the Recycling Modernization Act, which makes Oregon the second state in the country to establish a producer responsibility program for packaging and paper products. So Maine was technically first, although it was by like just a matter of days. And then Oregon passed our law. And then Colorado and California have since passed producer responsibility laws as well. And really the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality really gets the credit for pulling this bill together and worked really hard to get it passed. But in Oregon, our bill is not a full producer responsibility law. It's a shared responsibility law. So ratepayers are still paying into the system, but producers are brought in to start bearing some of the costs of the waste management system, which will bring a lot of much needed investment into the recycling system in Oregon. And I was appointed by the governor and then serve currently as the vice chair of the Recycling Council, which is an advisory body that helps to oversee the implementation of the Recycling Modernization Act. And that work is well underway. But I wanted to take a minute to just kind of run through some of the highlights of what the bill does. If you want to go to the next slide. Okay, so I explained the shared responsibility model, but so right now ratepayers pay for the whole system, right? And once this bill is fully in effect, ratepayers will pay for the system as it currently is, but then the recycling system is going to be expanded to more rural, bringing curbside recycling to more rural communities and to multifamily housing in urban communities. And producers will actually be responsible for paying for all of the system expansion costs. There are also additionally anything that basically improves the system. All of those costs are going to be bared by producers. And then one kind of key feature is that it creates one statewide list of what can be recycled. So right now, if you live in Portland or if you live in Brookings or if you live in Eugene, you have to kind of check and see what you can and can't recycle. But a key feature of this program is that no matter where you live in Oregon, starting on July 1st, 2025, you'll be able to recycle the same things. And, that'll just make it a lot easier for Oregonians to figure out what can and cannot go in the blue bin. And it also ensures that the things that you're actually putting in the blue bin are getting recycled. Because the only materials that end up on that statewide recycling list are materials that have an end market and have a certified responsible end market. So we are getting rid of the idea that we're just putting things in the blue bin, crossing our fingers and hoping it actually gets recycled. And it may or may not stay local. It may be shipped overseas, and then we don't know what's going to happen to it. We're actually going to have a new certification program that basically says these materials are going to a responsible end market. So there's going to be that assurance that those materials are actually getting recycled. And then it does do the eco-modulated fees. So it incentivizes producers to put materials on the market that do actually have that end market by creating a fee structure to create that incentive. And then, I think the other really exciting thing, which is not on this slide, is that there is going to be up to 10% of the system cost fee that's going to be charged to producers. So we're estimating it's up to $10 million that will be used to fund waste prevention. which I'm really excited about. So it'll create grant programs for restaurants to shift to reusable and refillable containers, for example, and just creating a pool of money, a pot of money, basically, that we can use to create reusable and refillable systems across the state, or to prevent plastic pollution. So all of these, we're hoping that by modernizing our recycling system, bringing in producers to start bearing some of the costs of the system, that we're going to see real environmental benefits, including a reduction in plastic pollution. There are several states across the country, and I think Virginia is one of them, that are considering these producer responsibility laws. And I think it's just a huge opportunity to get some money into the system to modernize recycling, but then also, again, creating those incentives to use less wasteful packaging and products on the market. So every state is different in how they want to approach this. And I think Oregon serves as just one example of how this can work. But for those of you who are putting your heads together to figure out how this could work for Virginia, I think you could look to Oregon, California, Colorado, and Maine, and learn some lessons from what those states are doing as well. So let me just stop there. Thank you so much for having me. Feel free to put questions in the Q&A. I'd be happy to answer. And then I think we're having questions at the end.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Celeste. So we're going to shift gears now a little bit. So our ultimate goal is to eliminate the idea and, the actuality of plastic pollution in our environment from happening in the first place. But until we do, we need to clean up what's there. So we're going to shift gears, and we're now going to hear from Hannah.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again to the organisers for inviting me to speak today. So I'm Hannah DeFrond, and I'll be talking today about trash traps and how you can use them for not only cleanup, but data collection and education. And in my role, I coordinate what's called the International Trash Trap Network, which is a collaboration between Ocean Conservancy and the University of Toronto Trash Team. Next slide, please. So just a bit of background, Ocean Conservancy, some of you will be very familiar with us, but we're a non-profit organisation, been around for almost 50 years, have several offices around the US. And one notable reason why Ocean Conservancy started the ITTM with the trash team is because they've been running the International Coastal Cleanup for over 35 years now. So they have extensive experience in collaborating with different groups and combining cleanup data from groups all around the world. Next slide. The U of T Trash Team is a community engagement and outreach group based in Toronto with a mission to increase waste literacy and reduce plastic pollution locally. So we were founded in 2017 in collaboration with the Rockman Lab at the University of Toronto, who do a lot of work on plastic pollution. And our team is based of students and volunteers. And we work in collaboration with other local stakeholders, and we run things like community outreach events, we have educational programming, and also solutions-based research projects, of which trash trapping is one. Next slide, thanks. So before I get into trash traps, I just want to briefly take a moment to set the scene and remind ourselves or explain why cleanup efforts are important. So a few years ago, in 2020, myself and a group of colleagues, we published a study where we looked at waste data from all around the world, and we wanted to investigate what actions would be required to significantly reduce global plastic emissions through a combination of plastic reduction, waste management, and then cleanup. And what we found, our overarching conclusion was that there's no one-size-fits-all strategy. So every scenario is different, every state is different, every city is different, and we need locally informed solutions to tackle local plastic pollution. And we found that obviously waste reduction and management are critical, but cleanup is also an essential part of the solution, because as long as we're emitting plastics into the environment, we need to clean them up to mitigate further ecological harm. So although cleanup is not the solution to plastic pollution, it does play an important role in combination with other strategies. Next slide, please. So we know that community cleanups are happening all around the world, and they collect millions of pounds of trash each year, which is very impressive. But to make a measurable difference now and into the future, we need to increase cleanup efforts worldwide by orders of magnitude. And so the question is, how can we do this best? And on the next slide, I'll tell you why. So that's where trash traps come in. So trash traps, which are also known as cleanup technologies and by several other names, are devices designed to clean up plastics and other human pollutants and trash from our waterways and coastlines. And they come in lots of different shapes and sizes, as you can see from the images here. They range from stationary bins that skim the water surface, to trash wheels that collect dumpsters full of trash, to booms, to robots that clean beaches. And so because there's lots of different designs, they can be used in marinas, rivers, beaches, even storm drains, as you can see in the center photo. And so there's likely a trash trap ready to tackle most scenarios at this point. And so trash traps can supplement community cleanup efforts because, unlike humans, some of them can run for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they can collect a range of debris items, from large plastics like the bottles you can see in the photo on the top right, to even microplastics that, as many of us all know, if you've ever tried to pick them up, they're extremely challenging to collect by hand. Next slide. And so obviously the primary benefit of trash traps is to clean up plastic waste, and they can do a very good job of that, but they also have other benefits that I wanted to highlight today. And because trash traps are unusual, they can be great focal points for public education and awareness of plastic pollution. So by talking to the public about how they work and what they capture, we can demonstrate that plastic pollution is not a faraway issue. It's something that's happening right on our doorsteps, and that cleanup is one of the ways to manage it locally. Also, trash traps can act as sampling tools for data collection on what's actually ending up in our waterways. So by collecting data and understanding what we're capturing, what the most common waste items are locally, we can understand the sources of these waste items and then use the data collected to inform solutions and management. So trash traps can be a really valuable tool for local management, and then collectively, they can be part of the global solution to plastic pollution. Next slide. And so in acknowledging the values of trapping trash, the ITTN was launched in 2021. And so we aim to increase global cleanup efforts using trash traps. And we've developed harmonized methods that groups can use to quantify our collective impact as part of the international coastal cleanup. And so as part of this, we aim to bring together local stakeholders to build trash trapping programs that are both impactful and sustainable. So they clean up our waterways whilst also engaging the community and also collecting data to inform other solutions. Next slide. Oh, I skipped a slide somehow. If it's gone, it's okay. So what you need to for a trash trapping project is, we call it the recipe for trapping trash, but you'll need a trash trapping device, a location to put it in, a passionate team of stakeholders, and some funding and a lot of motivation. And as part of this, the ITTN has developed resources that groups can use because there's a lot to consider. And these include data collection protocols, which I'll talk about in a second, but also a checklist of different things to consider while you're planning your project and implementing it. We have a method for identifying litter hotspots in your waterways so you can get the most bang for your buck in where you put your trap. And we also have a directory which includes information on over 50 different devices, which hopefully will help groups decide which device is right for their scenario. And so once you have your trap installed, you can use the trap as a monitoring tool, and this can measure your success. It allows you to understand local sources of pollution and use that data to inform local campaigns and local management to reduce plastics at the source. So to do this, we've developed, as I mentioned, harmonized protocols. So this means that we can have localized data that can also be compared nationally, internationally, even globally, eventually. And this can be publicly available for other groups to use as well, for research or for education or for even policies. And so we have this in one big database. And we've seen with the International Coastal Cleanup that this kind of big database of global cleanup data can be hugely impactful in policy decisions. And data from the ICC has been used to inform policies in the US, so municipal laws to prevent cigarette butt litter, balloon releases, and even other types of single-use plastics. And in Toronto, the U of T trash team, we've used a lot of the data we collect from our traps to inform our research projects. So we've used them, and Zach mentioned foam was a really important issue in Virginia. And we found the same thing. We found a lot of foam in Toronto. So we used that to inform a research project to try and identify where all that foam was coming from. So that's just an example of how we've used it. Next slide. And so to encourage the use of data to inform solutions, the ITTM, we collect all the data that's sent in at the end of each year, and we create these reports. And this report, as I mentioned, becomes available for anyone to use. And it might not be legible from this slide, but on the left is last year's ITTM report, where we collectively cleaned up over 460,000 pounds of plastics and other trash using these cleanup devices. And within this, I think it's really important to note that nearly 300,000 pieces of debris, of micro debris, so small microplastics and other small pieces of trash were recorded. So to take advantage of the unique opportunity that trash traps provide for local education and outreach, we know of several groups that have run events like community trap dives, in which people can come and get involved in the data collection processes. And we've also developed some resources that are coming out soon, which I'm very excited about, which is a kind of educational activity workbook for younger audiences that can be adapted for older audiences too. And the goal of these things is to take this unusual thing that people have seen in their local area and use it as a way to inspire people to create hands-on experiences and encourage communities to understand their local sources of pollution and solutions to that pollution, and to get people involved and get them to take action. And another example I just wanted to give a shout out to is a group in Tobermory in the Great Lakes in Canada. And they created this sign called Inspect to Sea Bin, and he's very cute and he gets a lot of attention on their harbour front. But he also has a QR code so you can scan and get information about what their sea bin does and about local pollution in the area. And one other thing I would say is that trash trapping is still a relatively new field, but we really feel that it's important, like we're doing today, to learn from each other and share knowledge and share information as these type of efforts grow. And so we've hosted similar workshops dedicated to trash trapping, and we hope to do more in the future. But I would say if you're thinking about using cleanup and using trash traps locally as part of the solution and part of your plans to reduce plastic pollution, then it's really good to reach out to other groups, ask what they're doing. We have a Facebook group you can join if you want to. You can email device manufacturers. They're usually very happy to help. Or you can even email me, because I'm always very happy to talk about trash traps. And I can also share any resources or advice or information that I've shared in today's presentation. Next slide. So this is just a few ways you can contact us. It's not meant to be really an advert for the ITTN, although it sounds like it is. But yeah, happy to answer any questions at the end about trash trapping. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hannah, for your time and all this great information. And I am going to now hand it over to our last speaker today, Jeff Flood.
Thanks, Ellie, for having me. And that's what a bunch of great presentations from all these speakers here. And I'll admit, my topic is a little bit of the oddball one because it's not as plastic heavy. I'll get into some of the environmental effects of abandoned vessels, but it is very similar in the sense that it's a waste management stream problem. It's a removal problem. It's a sometimes inception problem, and definitely it's a prevention and public awareness issue that we're facing in Virginia. So as you can see, I'm with the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. We've worked with Zach's organization for many years. They're a great trusted partner in Clean Virginia Waterways. And I am a coastal planner with this organization. We are located in Department of Environmental Quality offices in Richmond, Virginia. So coming to you from there right now. We have many folks here. I'll get into some of the aspects of our program and all of our partners. But you can see that NOAA is a part of this. So we work with the federal government quite a lot, and they actually fund us. So we're very thankful for our partners and funding from NOAA. Next slide, please. So just a brief background on my program, as other speakers have kind of introduced their organizations. We are, as I said in the first slide, we are housed at a state environmental agency, but we are a network of many state agencies, regional governments, and local governments. So we are really relying on the strength of our partners, their perspectives, their expertise, and their understandings of their level of government and how that works. So we all work together. And as I said, NOAA funds us through a grant, annual grant, each year, and we do our best to pass those funds down to the lowest level and most acute need as we can. So collectively known in Virginia, it's just folks call it Tidewater or east of I-95, but basically it's any of our coastal counties, localities, towns that touch a tidal body of water. So not all those areas are right on the shore or experiencing issues like sea level rise, but definitely at least a part of that locality is touching an area that is part of the actual coast. And we are our interagency, as mentioned, the first bullet point, our structure is the coastal policy team. They really give us a great guidance on the direction of the program and help us prioritize how we want to have our grant funding strategies. So as I mentioned, we're funded 100% by NOAA, so we can't thank them enough for all their support, and at the same time, giving us some technical assistance as needed in some of the larger regional plans with all sorts of marine debris. We've been around since 1986 in some form or another, but we've basically really had this network fairly for many years, and a lot of great trusted partners throughout those years. One thing, I won't bother with the jargon, but we have one pot of funding that is dedicated to over a 5-year period to result in new enforceable policies. Marine debris is one of several areas we evaluate every 5 years. Marine debris was picked as a priority topic for us to address. And every year doesn't have to necessarily result in a new law or policy, but we want to have information to get us to that point. We're very much a policy making not a body in the sense of a legislative or an agency rulemaking, but we're the ones that are really identifying the issues, providing the funding and support for the research to then give that information to those who are in a position to make those decisions. Next slide, please. So I'll save some time here. Zach already did a great job touching on these on our Virginia state plan. Just one thing to note is it nests well within the NOAA's marine debris action plan. So a lot of the actions and pillars that Zach had mentioned was for, including abandoned derelict vessels, is something that we are learning from other states. We're contributing. We meet on sort of a semi-annual basis. We get voluntary reports to NOAA, which helps them get an idea of where the states are in our region, and we can share lessons learned and best practices. Next slide, please. So getting to the problem that I mentioned at the very beginning, there are many things that abandoned vessels cause. They can crush an oyster reef. They can be aground in the salt marsh. They can be leaking fuel or other hazardous materials. If those are on board and the boat sinks, then that exacerbates the problem of removal and understanding how much it's affecting the environment. Plastic is the reason why I guess I was invited to this panel, but basically it's not as an acute problem in the sense that it will take a while to break down in the aquatic environment. So it's not an immediate wildlife concern to what I consulted the experts and our stakeholders, but it is something that can definitely disrupt habitat ecosystem functions, and certainly the hazmat and the fuel leakage is something not to be taken lightly. Navigational hazards. This is very much a human aspect too. This is not just protecting the environment and all of our four-legged friends and our fish. This is really talking about somebody could hit this in the middle of the night. No one's responsibly flagging it or reporting it, and if someone hits it, it could lead to fatalities. So this is very much a public safety crisis on our hands right now. And finally, the economic pain points of marinas and property owners and folks, even those who want to protect a viewshed on a state park or a historic resource site on the coast. You're impeding that value of that land and that use because you have an eyesore here, and it's unsafe for folks to be around in that water body, as well as the commercial shipping industry as well. Huge delays and supply chain stuff attributed to some of these vessels. Next slide, please. So finally, a pretty picture. This is actually the bad news, how many vessels we have across the Commonwealth. The red outline is our Virginia coastal zone, as we saw a couple slides earlier. This is actually, I'll get to in a second, but this is a result of a statewide inventory that we got with a lot of partners contributing. All of those dots basically are color coded based on which entity had submitted them. We've got about 230 across the Commonwealth. We think that it's severely underreported. Again, folks just on kind of a case-by-case basis, routine patrols with the Coast Guard and the Marine Police looking at these things, individual citizens reporting them. But that's quite a lot. And they're definitely concentrated on the lower Chesapeake Bay area, South Southampton Roads, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, those areas. And just as a note, I'll follow up later, but the blue icons are actually coastal landfills. We're in the midst of looking at exercise to match removal and then disposal as well, and the economics of that. Next slide, please. So let's just kind of take a step back to where we were. Why is this a problem? I'm showing a lot of dots on a map. It seems overwhelming. Well, what have we done about this? Well, it's been actually a pretty quick turnaround in terms of not knowing much to getting to a point where we have a program that's functioning. We still have a ways to go, but it's been a really great lesson with all our collaborators across different levels of government, our NGOs, tribes, and just general citizens, members of the towing industry, salvaging, and it's really been a great team effort. So back in December 2020, I was drafted to work with Katie Register, who's Zach's predecessor as an executive director of Clean Virginia Waterways. Katie and I had a great working relationship, co-chairing and investigating a lot of investigative work and research on the issue of the ADP problem. As you all recall, beginning of 2020, this was kind of going into the height of a global pandemic like people never experienced before. So we were able to get in and really work in pretty fast speed to get groups of stakeholders together to manage the logistics of virtual meetings, interviews, that sort of thing, to really wrap our heads around the problem and then start proposing policy solutions. But at this point, we really didn't know, anything other than anecdotal success stories or complaints. Potentially, we know it's an issue. Why isn't anything being done about it? Lots of frustration with what can the government do? What could the government do? What should the government do? And then the final realization, knowing that there's a lot of unfunded mandates, identifying who could actually legally do something at the state or local level, but realizing there was zero funding and zero staff capacity to do any of it. We all toss around capacity in a lot of our daily jobs and even personal lives. But what I mean is zero, I mean zero staff dedicated, zero money dedicated to this issue. So that was kind of wrapping our heads around the problem and then getting to the solution. What do we do about that? I can't lobby as a state employee. Our NGO friends can, but let's make sure we have the most informed decision and really actionable items. So that took a while with the work group to get to these solutions that could really be implemented. Just again, overcoming a lot of the challenges of working at pretty much breakneck speed, while still being very thorough and getting a lot of being very inclusive in that process. Next slide, please. So some of those things I already touched on. A lot of the work groups were met 34 times across work subcommittees. The overall work group, we interviewed 9 other coastal states programs to get an idea of best practices and pitfalls. We had great assistance from William & Mary's Law School, the Virginia Coastal Policy Center, doing a lot of the legal background research. We created the inventory, which I showed you previously. You got a lot of reports, a Google Forms survey, QR codes, that sort of thing. We finally produced a work group report that got the support of the new administration and our director of DEQ, and we're able to publish that after their review to get that out there with those legislative steps. And as a result of that, our recommendation for $3 million to our Virginia Marine Resources Commission, which are the only state agency legally able to remove these vessels or provide funding to localities to do that as well, they were given that funding. We also had opportunities to apply for a lot of funding from NOAA. And that was great to supplement the funds we already do. Again, policy planning, funding body at DEQ with the CZN program. These were supplemental funds to kind of give to our partners and hopefully build their capacity. I did a lot of background work working with VMRC. Again, my shop is not regulatory, but understanding there were some environmental compliance needs. I helped do that, coordinating with the Army Corps, DEQ, VMRC, and others to provide that and help VMRC with their program, working hand in hand with those folks there. And then looking into this one, I'll touch on the last slide, but initially looking into fiberglass recycling, reuse, and salvaging initiatives. is something we kind of worked on in the background, a lot of work to go on that. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the media coverage is kind of negative. We got kind of around reporting some of the progress that was made and understanding that there was the reason for the inaction in the past, the lack of capacity funding, sharing our story, sharing multiple perspectives. I've been interviewed by various news outlets. There's probably been at least a dozen publications. The Bay Journal article is right there a few years ago. But the great news to report right now is that BMRC's program is up and running, providing grants to localities and tribes to remove vessels. I've received permitting clarification from regulatory agencies that will go into streamlining the process for those who are actually removing the vessels to ensure environmental compliance. Public awareness is up in a great way. Again, with the media coverage, we're looking to continue that push and do more outreach in the ways that some of the previous speakers have shown, surveys, educational materials. And I'm sorry, looking like I'm rolling over here, but the inventory has been great. Progressing, but continuing to update that. And the next slide, please, on some of the grant proposals. So real quick, Glen Haven River now, great partner, got a huge chunk of change to remove 100 vessels over 3 years across the coastal zone. We also have some great partners. I noticed they're on the call here, ERP and Clean Virginia Waterways, obviously the ZAC. We're helping out there. Next slide, please. So if that was physical vessel removal, this is more of an online stakeholder outreach, a community coalition through Virginia Sea Grant, Old Dominion University in Norfolk, broadening the reach of the stakeholders, reaching underserved communities, getting it down to the citizen level as opposed to the experts. So again, informing the public and building a greater network of folks to collaborate. Next slide, please. And the last thing I'll touch on here is just capacity continuing. I'm helping out BMRC, the staff of one now. Sustained state funding, streamlining some of the paperwork. Prevention is big, a vessel turn-in program, getting proper disposal, understanding the obstacles, the psychological needs, the processes, how people perceive these vessels to make the right decision on removing them, salvaging, advanced recycling in terms of fiberglass, if it's reused or technically recycling. I'm looking at all the different options. And then inland ADVs are not covered by BMRC, so that's another area to potentially change legislation at the state level. And I will wrap up right there, realizing I did go over that, so I apologize.
No worries at all. Thank you so much for giving us that overview. It's such an important issue when it comes to marine debris. And there's so much work that we can do about it. So I do want to say thank you all for joining today. It does not look like we have time for questions to answer live here, but again, we have that form and we have been working through the Q&A as we go. You can fill out that form and we can follow up after the fact. We are hosting 2 more webinars. A few of the questions that I saw will actually be addressed later on in our coming webinars in this series. So if you haven't already, please do register for those last 2 where we talk about recycling as well as all that Virginia is doing currently to reduce single-use plastic. We thank all of our speakers for taking the time out of their schedules to join us today. And we hope to see many of you for the rest of our webinar series. We hope you have a great day.